circumference of the black child. Was a passage. National Conference of the Black Child.
I was being influenced by social forces that they couldn't even touch, couldn't even understand.
You getting your information from what you watch on the news.
Yeah, that's
you
what
getting information what they're feeding you.
I was being influenced by social forces that they couldn't even touch, couldn't even understand.
You getting your information from what you watch on the news.
Yeah, that's
you
what
getting information what they're feeding you. And when you're in control of the media, you feed what you want to feed out there.
Thank you very much, Sis. I'd like to begin the second part of the first day of the conference. Welcome back. Hope everybody feels refreshed and full after lunch. I have a few announcements that I'd like to make before I introduce our second speaker for the conference. Please come in as quickly as possible and find a seat so that we can get going. The first thing that I'd like to say, and this has come from the delegates as well as a feeling that I have myself about the purposes of conferences like this, is that we should use the opportunity seriously to network. People have said to me that they would like to make contact with other people in the audience who are involved in similar areas of work. So we're trying to organize that. But what I'd like you to do is to take the opportunities yourself to talk to people. One sister came up to me before break, Sister Jendihai from Bristol. Are you here? Is she here now? Now, she's running a Saturday school in Bristol and is interested in networking with anybody else who is involved in the supplementary school movement. Now, I know that there are lots of people here who are involved in Saturday schools, and she will leave a list at the registration desk at the front for people to put their names down if they're interested in making contact and strengthening that network. Whilst we're on the subject of networking, I also spoke to somebody called Brandon Scott. Brandon, are you here? Okay, Brandon's just indicated he's at the front there. A list has been put up outside with regards to networking, again, around issues such as the sorts of things that we've been dealing with today. So if you're interested in finding out more information on lectures to do with African-centeredness, to do with actually progressing our people, then there will be lists outside for people who are interested. Please put your names down and speak to Brandon, who is here. I need to say something about Professor Small. Apparently, we have Professor Steve Small. Steve, where are you? Okay. And I said that the workshop tomorrow, Sunday, on rites of passage in the inner city would be cancelled because Professor Small was unable to be here. He's traveling to Uganda. I was referring to Professor James Small, not Steve, who is here, and he has made it clear to me that he is here, and he will be here tomorrow as well, okay? So apologies for any mix-up on that front. One serious notice that I'd like to give before I hand over to our second speaker. I toyed with the idea at the beginning of the conference in actually naming the people who have organized this conference. I mean, people have said to me, thank you for chairing, and you've been chairing very well. The chairing bit of it is the easy part. The hard work, the hard graft that has gone into organizing this conference has been done by people, not myself, but other people who are in the background out there working very, very hard. I would like you all, please, to give a hand to those people who have committed themselves to organizing this conference. Some very solid, dedicated, hard work. Along the same lines, could I ask delegates, please, to respect that commitment and that hard work in your dealings with the people who are organizing and trying to make this conference what it ought to be. We have had some difficulties, and again, I was given the choice as to whether I wanted to raise it or not, and I think it is appropriate that I do so. Like other people, I made sure that my African outfit was clean for this conference. Yeah, it went to the dry cleaners so that I could turn up looking the part. But I assure you that in terms of what is happening internally, I live the part. And I think it's important for us when we come to these conferences to bring those values with us. Some of the women who have been working on the desk outside have had difficulties with people paying their fees. I wish to speak frankly here. No one has contributed money for this conference to enable it to run. The organizers have worked hard to do so by themselves. And these things need paying for. We need to pay for this hall. We need to pay for accommodation. We need money. We are relying on people's honesty and integrity in this. And I think it's unfortunate that already some of the women working outside on the desk have had to have words with people about payment. If you are on wage, then pay on wage. If you're working, pay the money. Right, I want to get back nice now, but you know, sometimes we have to just talk straight. You understand me? So that we just continue in the spirit that we are meant to. Dr. Rosalind Jefferies. Dr. Jefferies hails from New York. Her academic record includes a BA, 2 MAs, and a PhD, her major discipline being art history. A multilingual teacher and lecturer, and a writer who has been published, her fields include African American history, Egyptian art, racism, and ethnicity. She has been involved in creating curriculum materials for the public school system in Atlanta, as well as conducting field studies in the Ivory Coast and Senegal. I give you Dr. Rosalind Jefferies.
Greetings. Once again, it's a pleasure to be here in Manchester at the university. It's a pleasure to address you, and I'd like to give special thanks to the organizers of this conference, particularly to Paul Obina and all of the entire staff The work that you are doing is very, very important. It's a life and death work involved in saving a race of people. It's a life and death work involved in saving our entire globe. It's a universal and a humanitarian work that is ordained by God Himself. As you heard this morning in the process of doing the libation, I started off very positive, understanding a God force and being connected with that which is most high, which is part of my daily activity. And in doing so, I build up, and it's not I, but it's God that builds up. And it's this power and this presence and this force that becomes the creativity of life. I am an art historian, and I do talk about creative works. But we find that the process of insisting on dealing within the relationship of love and bondage that way, it gives you the strength. And if you lead a life as righteous as possible, it gives you the authority to stand and be who you are. Those that have trouble standing and being who you are in the rightful boldness are those that are always trying to slipshod and do wrong things and undermine. And so this is a conference about imagery, the process of creating and making and dealing with imagery. And so I say it's the power and that love of God that makes me stand, so that at every day we have to all participate in the process of changing imagery. The changing and decharging the imagery that's negative. When we turn on the television, when we look at newspapers and we see imagery that's not correct, we have to be the Eshu. We have to be the Tahuti. We have to be the messenger and the transformer. And so the studying of ancient cultures is one that teaches us the process of changing imagery. You see, most of us will have talent. Talent is good. To be gifted is good. Imagination is good. Imaging, the process of imaging. But it's good only if you're connected in your rightful relationships, because you can have a talent for doing the evil. You can be gifted for picking locks and robbing cars, and that will not get you where you need to go. You have to understand that God will love you so much that He will cause the miracles and the doors to open that should open in your life. You'll discover meaning and truth and reality that's right, and not live in a fantasy. You look at the young people, and sometimes you worry when they get to the age of teenage, because so often they can get caught up so easily in the superficial things of life. They can be living in fantasy. I mean, you can put on the right kind of dungarees or pants, the right kind of label, the right kind of hat, the right kind of shoes, and just come, and they know that, oh, this is the latest, that's the best thing. They fall in love with the image. And they'll be off on a fantasy trip. I mean, the most awful demon can be walking around prancing and styling in the right clothes, and you'll fall after the clothes and not have the substance. And so thus we need to know about imagery and the magic or the alchemy of creating and making. What is art? Art is man's great sense of himself embodied in a world of his own making, said Frank Lloyd Wright. And so that we end up, as the Chinese say, man sculpts his own soul. So those images and ideas that you work with daily in turn comes back to sculpt you. Art is capable of uniting levels of consciousness. And so if we think of a huge pyramid, at the top portion of the pyramid is our superconsciousness. The registry underneath that would be your consciousness, the one under your subconsciousness, and the one underneath that, your unconscious. So as a race of people, there's all kinds of garbage and strange things in our unconscious, things that are there that we did not even put there, but the circumstances. It's the level of slavery. It's the level of bondage, the level of rape, of decapitation, of disjunctedness. It's the level of the blood spill, of the skull and the bones, and the chalking of reality and wiping out and taking away the positive. It's the evil in your own family and situations. It's unconscious because if it was to come up too much, you'd have trouble and you'd become part of these dual or triple personality types that have to split off. Life is too painful, so you have to push and do other things. And then there's the subconscious, the subliminal area, that if you're not careful, that those are the things in life that go down from television and the media, etc., into those areas and will cause you to be reacting and doing things not of your own unless you're conscious of it and recharge those negative items and build up in the affirmations so that you can have control over your own dreams. It's possible to dream at night and control your own dreams if you know the power of affirmations that can go into the subconscious. But then you have the God consciousness, and that's the region that has a beeline straight down and can go down into the unknown regions of the underworld within your being and transform and change and cause the links of generations and generations and generations of wrongdoings. You can break the chain. And so this is what we mean by imagery and the power to transform and to change. We must understand the history in antiquity to find out that our Africans in antiquity understood the power of the mind, the soul, the brain. They understood the power of Eshu. Freud and Jung still studying, during their time to get information and ideas from who Eshu was and what he was doing. Eshu represents that which is the tester that comes out to test what are you thinking now? What are your images now? And if they're not right and correct, you'll find yourself in chaos and confusion and destruction. He's the one that can run up from up high, down low, to cause chaos in your life so that you can transform. You're too comfortable. And so Eshu will come along and cause confusion so that you move from one area into another. And so that the concept came into the New World with the slaves, it came as Brer Rabbit. No wonder we had Bugs Bunny in Hollywood, because all those slaves were telling the Brer Rabbit stories over and over that had lessons and parables. We had Anansi the spider from Ghana that came into Jamaica. He was a trickster. Some of the sexuality was lost, but the messages were still there to be learned. We learned the trickster phenomena was already in the Americas with the raven stories, the big black bird that came down and was able to catch light and to deal with light. And certainly that's the story of the melanin and the power of the polycyclic aspects of a melanin, a big black bird that had the ability to deal with light and transformation. And so it's the melatonin that comes out the pineal area that deals with the light of the soul and of the being. But it's not just the melanin skin in and of itself, for we have black devils as well as black gods, like we have white devils and white gods. For the skin will wither away and die like the grass of the field. What counts is your indomitable soul. And so we're talking today about media transformation so that you'll not be victim of whatever may happen to you in life. I remember a young man coming to me so depressed, a young child, and said, "Oh, they told me at school that I was out to lunch," because he was involved in, just higher things and doing his studies and his work, and some of the group wanted to go and just do foolish things, and he was insistent on not being a part of the foolishness. And so the young man said, well, they said I was out to lunch. And I said, well, what did you say back? I didn't say anything. I said, you didn't say anything back, and you took what they said and you believed it and you felt sorry for yourself? No, do not feel sorry for yourself. Say, well, I'm not only out to lunch, I'm feasting, and I'm feasting on some great things. You have to be to the point where no one can insult you because you know who you are. And so that's what I say, teach the power of imagery within words and reactions to the youth, that they'll know how to defend themselves. They'll know how to defend themselves in time of need. So in the process, you see, what we were doing was taking the negative image and making it positive. And this is what history and education is about for us as a people. It means that we have to take the Aunt Jemima image, which we did, and we have to reverse it back to primal mama. I said her name was not Lucy, but Nana Sapphire, right? And so we have to take Aunt Jemima and not see her as the big, fat, unwanted that can do all of the nurturing and the work as a slave and as a dog, as a chattel, right? I mean, she could not have been that anyway. Races and creeds, all kinds of people will give their children to the black woman to raise because they knew of her virtues. And so how dare we look upon that which was guarded by other races and people, and we look down and say, well, you're no good. We'll push you down, push you back. So Aunt Jemima is looking good today. Nana Sapphire, Mama Opal. Mama Ebony is wonderful. Be she honeysuckle, or be she molasses, be she cinnamon, or toasted toast, buckwheat, whole wheat. She's delectable butterscotch. And some of them are not only ebony and blacker, the berry, the sweeter the juice, dark, but some of us are cashews and vanilla. And light top over with little peaches. Let's not lose the art of talking about how sweet we are to each other. For that is what classism is. What is classism? We're beginning to lose some class in the struggle and strife of being disjuncted. So there's the naive period, number one, the developmental phase in art, and there's number two, classism, and then there's number three, post-classical. And so as you're developing, getting yourself together, you're not together, we think of that as naive, primitive, and wild. But the classism is when you know who you're about and what you can do, and you can relish and lavish in its lucrative aspects. And so you can pass on charming words to charm each other with your beauty and your glory. What is classism but the little details of the polish of a fine piano? The detail and polish of the crown upon your head, the detail and polish and the intricacies of the woven aspects of the African garment that you're wearing. So we must not lose our classism. I'm reminded of this same very week, the early part of the week, there was an announcement by Sister Soldier that went out, and it said, women, if you're coming for an interview, please wear clothes. Because some of the videos have gotten so low until they're so pornographic, they're nothing but like the women coming in as prostitutes and not people with good singing voice. Classism gone. Emulation of the vulgar and the low. So there was one time when Motown in Detroit was putting out people who were singing wonderful music of love, singing romance to each other. And then there came polygraph. The music changed. So other people come in and have their money and their vested interest of you lapping behind somebody else's rear end and down on all fours. And what the Two Live Crew, did they say biting off the woman's breast so that blood was coming? That's not classical. Not only is it not classical, it's not healthy. It leads to destruction, decay, and dying. So what are you giving birth to? Are you giving birth to AIDS upon AIDS, the disjuncted, the bloody mess that's of destruction? Are you creating paintings of poison for children to drink? Are your words in the classroom as your own personal confusion that you give them to drink daily? If you do that and your life is not together, you're just the same as the Two Live Crew with the songs that talk about biting off the woman's breasts. And then sometimes men and women will, in their confusion, continue the cycle of, they will sit down and put themselves in situations in their mind, romanticizing over the wrong image, the wrong people, then go running after what they have built up in their mind, knowing that it's going to be destruction. I mean, you know that man is death. And you running after it, building up constantly, which you think about, that's what you emulate. Oh, his eyes look like so-and-so. Oh, just the touch, just the face, just the nose. If you think those images, what do you think going to happen? The images will take you over. Possession, what is possession? But that which you conjure up and call forth, because you may not know the power of imagery and how to change it. And so not only was there the Aunt Jemima, anything that was sacred, you take it and you flip it around, you get the opposite coin. The enemies of our souls understood this so well. And so therefore, when they saw us raising hands during the slaving era, because we were in ecstasy praising the Lord, then in the minstrel era, it was raising the hands around the face saying, na 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 na, big lips and blackened face. And we took it up and we became the minstrels to do it better than those that had created it to mess with us. So anything positive, historically, they would take. They looked at the Yoruba conical hat coming up to a point, the beaded fringe across the face. It meant priest, that which has the pinnacle on top of the head reaching to the Most High. And in the New World, it became the dunce cap. And to teach the children the songs and the fairy tales and the rhymes that came out of other people's horrors that we had to pick up and try to live to repeat. Rockabye baby in the street top, when the bough breaks, the cradle will fall. Now, how are you going to tell your little child all of that fear? We're going to put you in a little cradle and put you up there, and when the branch of it breaks, you're going to fall down. Humpty Dumpty sat on the wall. Humpty Dumpty had a great fall. All the king's men and all the king's horses could not put Humpty Dumpty back. Don't tell your kids that. That's what they told me. That's what I read when I was a kid. So that had to be decharged. I'm not sitting up on the wall on a fence. On the wall, between black and white, between this, that, and the other, you will get ripped up. Don't know who you are. Ring around the rosy, a pocket full of posies, and all fall down. Teach your kid to fall down. Can't stand up, trying to go straight, you're going to teach them to fall down. So we have to be careful about the rhythms and the rhymes that we're teaching to our young people. I remember back in January, of this year, we went to Martinique, my husband and I, and we were on a Pan-Africanist panel. And after giving a talk on the panel, they had a question and answer, and there was a woman in the audience asked the question, and so she said, what are your values as a people? And so I was thrown off by the question. It was a simple question. Wanted to know, what are the values of black people? I said, how could all of this discussion, all these high-powered people come from Africa on the panel, South America and Europe and all of these places? And then the woman asked that kind of a question. I didn't know what was going on. How could you ask such a simple question? What are your values? But the reason she was asking, when I looked at her, she was really sincere. She wanted to know, in face of the negative media images that go around the world, the syndicated formulas of blacks being killed and killing each other, and the violence and the horror, what kind of people are you, is what she was really asking. All I know is fright and fear that I hear about you, and your image is horrible. And so I had to say, well, in essence, if you look, our history will tell you what kind of people we really are. We did not put 6 million people in the oven. We're the type of people who did not commit genocide on any group of people. We're the kind of people who did not go out to colonize another race or nation so that we might rip off the rubber and the minerals and the natural resources, be they material mineral resources or human beings. What kind of people? We are people who produced a Martin Luther King, whose basic themes were nonviolence. And they were willing to go up against dogs, to do whatever, to show that all races and creeds belong in God's kingdom and that we ought to live together. It was a nonviolent philosophy that affected the world, created more so by Mahatma Gandhi, but it was Martin Luther King. It was one of us that picked up that particular battle. Not all of us believed it, but some said, no, you hit me, I'll kill you. Turn the other cheek, says Islam. But it was still a force that meant I have a right to be who I am. What kind of people we are, we must go back and tell our children about our Holocaust and what we went through, or else they will forget and think that they are the same as others who've had a history of doing those things and not sharing. So these are the imagery conference, the image of who you are and your true identity. And so we're looking for a holistic reality. And yes, the movie came out by our own Spike Lee, and we like Spike Lee, but the image of the entire movie was not exactly what we wanted. There was the American Experience put out something on Malcolm X, and it's very good. So that documentary is what we really wanted Spike Lee to do. But Spike Lee's artistic creation came out first, then afterwards there were some that weren't pleased because they said, well, it's too much concentration on the Zoot Suit period. Once the transformation had occurred in his life, they needed to show more about the in-depth relationships he had with presidents of foreign countries and how they invited him in, and his role at the OAU. Those kinds of things were significant in his life. And so we need to talk about that. And even when it comes to Martin Luther King, the fullness of him is not yet told. And that's what we want, the whole picture in the media. For Martin Luther King had far more to do with Africa than we have given credit. He was part of that document that was called the Declaration of Innocence that was with Bishop Pike and others in South Africa, trying to help them to deal with their relationships within this apartheid system. And in 1957, he was invited to Ghana, where he had a relationship with Nkrumah. And he worked violently with the idea of getting rid of poverty, racism, and war, those three things. And he also, during the time of Lumumba, had special interviews with him and Lumumba in reference to the Congo. And Martin Luther King also visited Garvey's grave in Kingston and had understood the role that Garvey played in a far more significant way than we think. And so we're looking for now some new research that's going to come out that will give an image that's far more complete and whole. And so that's what we must always do, be willing to see the wholeness, to learn it. Education becomes ever the more so important for us. And now I'd like to go to some slides, and in the slides I'll continue some of the discussion about imagery and education of our youth. So if we can have the lowering of the lights and the first slide. Okay. The first slide that I chose to show today is one of the New World Order. There are many thoughts and ideas. Some of them become obsolete, some of them are changing. But the New World Order, this is one, Gary Carr, who was a congressman in the United States, put out a book, and this is one of the pages from the book. And it's saying that they wanted to have a new globalism, new people coming together to have a new world. And so my husband said, what are you talking about? There's no new world, Rosalind. They're the same old colonialism, imperialism in new disguises. When they had slavery before, the new slavery is drugs. And I mean, when you get to the point where it costs more for one person them to go to prison than it does for them to go to Yale University, right? Then we know that some other system is at work, right? It's more profitable, it's giving people whose jobs to run these prisons, etc., a new kind of system. And so that they said Zone 1 will be the United States, what we know today, Canada, and Alaska. We'll dissolve those boundaries, call that Zone 1. Zone 2 will be the United States of Europe. And Zone 3 will be Japan, because Zone 10 will be China. You need those Japanese probably to control the Chinese, so you give them a higher number. And we heard about the banking systems, et cetera, and Japanese banking systems, coming up higher than the American banking systems. And so that all of these are new concepts and challenges. And so we're still thinking about certain little small-time black power things, and you have a globe to deal with, it is all obsolete. The children will say, Garvey who? Malcolm who? They said, I heard of Louis XIV. Louis the 14th, Henry the 8th, or whatever, and then who is Malcolm the 10th? That's what they used to say. Now they know Malcolm X, right? But they used to say Malcolm the 10th. But anyway, they're going to unite all of Europe into one United States of Europe. And so we don't mind getting together. It's desirable for people to work together. It's desirable for unity. But the question is, in a new globalism, a new world order, is it the same rehearse of what we've seen before, where you have all of the white folks sitting down, mapping out the whole globe, giving themselves a big piece of the white supremacy pie, and everybody else nothing? I mean, if you say, well, it's not going to happen, aren't you exaggerating? But we do remember during the time of W.E.B. Du Bois, when all Europe sat down and divided up Africa, and they said, French, you take this, British, you take these, Portuguese, you take this, Germans, you take, it happened before. And so unless we're in there with our boldness and our courage, we'll not be able to go into the next century, but we'll go into there with just a little remnant of confused mess and confused people. And so just like you have these music companies to come in and pollute what may be the rightful thing in black music, and pollute things of our visual and creativity to mess with our images and our minds, and we're still walking around like some strange zombies or strange machines, then we'll never have any kind of a rightful place in society, in the globe. And so some of this work is work that we must do. And so white folks, you must understand that some of the work that we're doing is trying to get our people together. I mentioned it's not a racist philosophy. Some people think that because anything is black, it's anti-white. It's not so. We understand that there are black devils as well as black angels. And I mentioned white angels as well as white devils, and you know it too. And so it's a question of the completeness. We're tired of you taking what we say out of context and blowing it up in the media so that we'll die. Sometimes people come to these affairs as reporters and they know nothing about black history and black culture. How can they send you out as a reporter and you don't have any background? So that sometimes, I'm not saying all reporters are that way, but many are. And we've suffered at their hands. All right, let's go to the next slide. And we find, I don't know if you can see this or whether it's still too light. I think we need to fix the lighting. Can you see it now? That's a little better. Okay. So at the top, what you see is William Blake's rendition of European, and it's saying that he was the builder of the pyramids. And so that's what the text up top says, that this is the face of the individual, what he must have looked like. In other words, there was part of a racist system that said if you had an aquiline nose, it meant that you were smarter than any and everybody else. It was also phrenology, talking about the shape of the head and what the shape of the most intelligent people of the universe looked like. And of course, it was like children that say me, myself, and I, and ego. You don't have to teach, you have to teach children to share. You say, oh, no. You give, and we teach them. And so that overblown ego is part of human nature that's untaught. And so this idea of, no, it's only me. And then, of course, those that can't do anything are black. As you see over the end, and you say you come from the animals, you're animals. So these are old William Blake. During that time, these kinds of studies were done, and we know the repercussions in America. The Shockleys and the Jensens and the Levins continued that theory over and over. But then it said, we produced our own emblem, and our emblem said that we are a man and we are a brother. And so this was the positive thing. And so they would go back and take what we says is positive and turn it around. And so this is what they produced. And this is an old etching. Am I a man and a brother? And so once again, we have to be used to this. Whatever's positive, taking it and making it negative. We have to realize that the information in ancient Kemet was so powerful and wonderful until people took it and used it. We have no objections. That's wonderful. But don't turn around and say that we have no capacity to do anything. What you're looking at is the architecture of the courthouse in Newark, New Jersey, and if you look up in the center, you will see the solar wing disk, and you see the Egyptian columns. And so that same solar wing disk that we find on the graveyards in America, in the colonies, was brought over for that same reason. Here we find Egyptian columns and the solar wing disk in New York City at the tombs where the judicial system. Here in Paris, we find the Egyptian figure. It's all over in the architecture. It's easy to find over and over. This is New Haven, Connecticut, where I went to do my work on the PhD. I often pass this building, and it has the solar wing disk right up there on the top and the Egyptian columns. And so here, that same concept continues in the art of Kemet, from the art of Kemet into Islam and Christianity. And so we end up with, thank you, so we end up with the solar wing disk around the head, the halos. The halos are the symbol of Ra, the symbols of our moon. So it's that anointing, and the wings of the angel were those same wings that came from the Ba bird, the soul bird. Okay, so here we have soul bird imagery. I have a full lecture, but I'm just saying that I do on talking about the paintings of Ethiopia, relating them to the art of ancient Kemet. But that's another book and a work that's in progress that's going to come out. But here we have figures, once again, half human, half animal on the ends. We have the lion and what gets to be a human body. And so that mixture of a kind of sphinx here is what goes into the early Christian art. The bull head and a human body. The eagle head and the human body. The lion represents the book of Matthew, the royalty. But that's Epidemic, the god of Nubia, representing a high force and a high concept in Nubia. Epidemic, the lion, which became the Lion of Judah. Then we had the bull, and the ox represents servitude in Christianity, but it's the same ox that represents the Ka of the divine kingship system that we saw on the Nubian, the Kemetic Narma palette. And then, of course, we see the bird, that's the eagle that represented the John, the Revelator. And I was caught up in the third heaven. These levels of consciousness that I was talking about. And if you're caught up in the third heaven, you have the ability to get information to go back down into the unconscious, the subconscious, and the unconscious, to cross out those things that happened to your ancestors during slavery that you yet carry the burdens of today. We find that sometimes black male and females are not getting along together. Back in slavery, it was an offense for the master to see a couple in love with each other getting along. He said, no, your greatest love belongs to me, the master. I will rape you tonight. I'll sell him tomorrow. And so thus the man had a strange relationship to woman. And so we have to go back. Professor James Smalls talks about the post-slavery syndrome trauma. So that's a lecture in and of itself. But mine, dealing with the unconscious, it says that there's some rapes and things that are there that the caught in the third level can go back to transform those images. This is a conference about imagery. Okay, so it's clear where the solar wing disc came from. You can see it here, and the wings on the side. Human and animal combinations to represent negative and positive forces and concepts. The Ba bird sits with the bird body and the head, and the sunshine with the solar energy lines radiating down. Two hands up, representing the symbol of the Ka, K-A. The Ka and the Ba together. A painted mural in America where people have reached back to antiquity to become inspired for the modern. A mural that shows the influence of ancient Egypt and West Africa mixed with Caribbean figures and figures from all over. So here is the idea that we don't have to sit down and take all of the mess, take all the negative stereotypes and do nothing. But our education must tell us that our cartoonists must draw new cartoons. When the New York Post or any of these other journals come out with strange kind of cartoons, our youth must draw. This is a young man that drew this. And so that our young people must draw those cartoons to give positive imagery behind the teachings that we give them. And so too we have a right to speak. We have a right, we have a voice. If the time was not the time of a new world order, then we would not be so urgent. So we have to listen to what all of the different groups say, whether you agree with them or not. But the time is so urgent until blacks want the right to hear what you have to say. And so that the New York Times will come out with an image, which is there, that he's holding up the Times there, an image of Farrakhan on the Times, and it shows his face looking mean and terrible. And that's what went out, but then the Nation of Islam published one showing a face smiling, which is the usual one and not one that's stern and demagogic. But then the Village Voice came out with one to make it look like a cartoon. Well, you have nothing to say of that. Why? Because there was a meeting in New York City where Farrakhan called the men together, and thousands of them came out. That's right, 20,000 came out. And so you have others that are calling out, and Farrakhan said, no, I take away, Khalid Muhammad, I take away your right to speak for the Nation of Islam. Say what you want, but not for the Nation of Islam. And so Khalid Muhammad went on and on and on, and he started to say things that were so offensive to blacks and so offensive to whites and on. But we have to realize that in every time and era, we've had people to rise up and say the most awful things, and we accepted it. When we had the painting Guernica to come out, people say, oh, Picasso is horrible, but the painting was supposed to be horrible. It was talking about a Civil War situation, and it was the worst horrible thing, in paintings for its day, age, and time. And so, it was striking and horrible to us. It was as horrible as the Guerre mask here that you're looking at, the Wee mask of the Ivory Coast. And it was supposed to represent fear and horror in and of itself. It was both male and female, masculine tubular eyes and slit eyes of the female. It had sounding little bells on it to make noise. It had the elements of the wilds of the bush, the wings that it could fly, and all kinds of, sometimes human hair was all on it. It was frightening. It was the wrath of God. And yet this wrath of God image is the judge mask. It sits to judge. It sits to perform a most powerful, positive function. And so go back and take the Khalid Muhammad tape and analyze, go through the dung, and find out what's being said. It's as vile as the prophet Elijah. Prophet Elijah went around and he went to the potter's quarters. And God told him to look at the pots, and he'd pick out one that was all cracked and messed up. And so that's the pot. And then he was told to go out and take off all of his clothes and put this nasty rag on the clothes, which was buried a long period of time, and probably was dirty rags was associated with women's menstrual blood and also with unclean. And so he had this vile, smelly, nasty thing on the end of a stick and went around putting it in the nostrils of the noses of people. And so there it was. That's what he was told to do. So sometimes what we call righteous and nice is still like filthy rags in the nostril of God. And so we need to look at our society as saying that we need to separate the wheat from the chaff, no matter what your race, color, or creed. This is a time where we'll all die of the diseases of humanity unless we learn how to come together properly. And so things that we don't even want to look at, we must begin to look at in a time like this. Here's the mask of the Upper Volta people saying that the crescent form was one that still manifested in the art, and it's a pre-Islamic symbol and still being used. And so here we have another painting here by Rembrandt, and it's the portrait of Juan de Pareja by Rembrandt. Classical painting. And Juan de Pareja by Rembrandt, classical, reminds us of the pungency of the nail stuck in this figure, the Inkisi nail to awaken, to conjure up those things that are right and correct for the purpose of the promulgation of the people. To ride the Black Panther, the Panther Party in California, young people who wanted to feed each other, right, to get food for the poor, for the hungry. Black Panther was being ridden in ancient Egypt by the royalty. Tar black, melanin black. The Leopard Society of the Cross River, that leopard was as if it was the Black Panther. It was an organization for protection, but it also at one time was involved with the slave trade. And so it's the same story that Malafi Asante was talking about. At what point are we serving our people, and at what point are we dealing corruption for our own gain? It's the same story about the ego. Young man, which way will you turn? This is Zosa, the build of the step pyramids. Part of a lecture that Asa Hilliard has, a whole package that you would want for your young people that shows those pharaohs that are black. And yes, they were black pharaohs. We know from the melanin dosage tests of Cheikh Diop, Civilization and Barbarism, by the book. It must be outside with the vendors. But anyway, many you can find that show the black pharaohs. But I want to just show here the imagery and concept of composites. See, not enough of us have taken African American and African art history to know the symbols and configurations of your own people, to know the ideograms, the pictograms, the psychograms, so that when the Western world tells you that Africa had no abstract art, which is what I was told, Africa has no abstract art. All they can do is primitive art. And all they do is decoration. So when they call your art decoration and primitives and naives, and their art is real art. That's the real art of classism, when in actuality we do it all. We do classical works. The works of Ife and some of the classical works of Benin challenges that of any other culture in the world. It's high art. We do ideograms, pictograms, and psychograms. We do graphics. We do all kinds. And so here's a case of an abstract composite that gives a concept of a wholeness. Right at the end, we find the lotus blossom at the bottom. Out of the blossom comes a serpentine body, human arms, and then the animal lion's head. Even when you look at the shield of Great Britain, you'll see two lions. But lions don't romp around the snow in Europe. So that other cultures have taken the symbols of the tropics, right? Because it becomes part of a global thing after a while. Here's another example of composite thinking. We have Zamble, Mask of the Ivory Coast, Guli people, and it shows antelope horns, nice and graceful antelope. The hyena mouth, eyes rather, hyena. You have to laugh sometimes. Sometimes you have to take it with a grain of salt. Sometimes you have to bite your tongue. You have to be steadfast and full of patience and unmovable. Steadfast and unmovable. But then the mouth is that of the leopard. So you have power of the leopard, the ability to tear apart if necessary, to laugh and be cunning and clever, and then the gracefulness. It's like the composites that Muhammad Ali spoke about. He said you can be you can float like a butterfly, and there you go. And so here we find Zamble is floating but not quite like a butterfly. It's supposed to give you the idea that this thing can move in space, can fly in space, and yet it has animal horns on top. Animal horns to represent the days of creation, and it creates a dust pattern. It twirls, and then it comes moving way up as if it's going to float in the air, as if it has that helium effect like our super basketball players Michael Jordan. There's Michael Jordan jumping now, walking in air. Here's Michael Jordan again, winding up, getting ready to make a big jump. Helium in the sneakers. And here again, another composite where we had the antelope horns, radiation of the sun and water, and then large genitals down at the bottom, which you don't see, but it means to seed the ground, fertility, to seed the ground. Agricultural society, one of 6 societies that's no doubt part of the ancient mystery systems of the Nile that moved across the continent. Like you have the Dinka people, right, in the Sudan, and then eventually you have the Mandinka of the Western Sudan, and then in the Americas you had the Mandingo, a combination. And so that modern art copied off us, or got inspiration, both. They copied and they got inspiration. We've had shows throughout Europe and also in America showing you how they did both, talking about the art of Picasso and his so-called Negro period, about Leger and how he was inspired and did the creation of the world around the earlier part of the century. And so that there was a section to deal with ancient Egypt, the front view eye on the profile, the figure stiff. And then there were the Iberian Peninsula figures, and then the one from Africa way on the end. But they didn't know much about Africa at that time. And so they said, well, we'll use those as primitive wild figures. That's what it represents. And so it's telling you that if you don't watch out for the kind of sexuality that you have, you don't watch out with your imagination has the power to pick up pornographic-like stuff and lead you down the wilds and cause destruction. And so the original painting had a man in a suit with fruit, forbidden fruit on the table, and wild prostitutes in the background. Les Demoiselles d'Avignon. Avignon was a prostitute area in Barcelona, Spain. But we look at this painting and it's wonderful, it's nice because it was the advent of modern art. And Cubism was one of those movements that came out of Africa. And he was inspired by the energy of Cubism. But to look and say that we are associated in Africa with the wildness of things, and this is what our children learn about art, be careful about the art history, what it is that your children are looking at and worshiping. There was one time as children we worshiped conquistadors and matadors, just like you played cowboys and Indians. And you would take the side of the people who are going out destroying the Native Americans. Or you take the side of the conquistador, a keg of liquor, and you dress up a Halloween like one, but you didn't explain to your children about the negativity. We don't want you to be like that. And tell them to dress up like W.E.B. Du Bois, not like the man with the keg of, drunk and no background. So are we worshiping the right people in our history? Are we looking at things properly? It's part, yes, of the information that has to be an information of teaching for the purpose of growth and development. All right, this is Frida Kahlo, and you can see once again, are we aborting? Are we killing our children? What are we doing? Our children can be physical children, and they can also be our concepts and ideas, the images that come from the area of the head that deals with imagery and making. Tall obelisk that represents resurrection is certainly not just with Aksum 500 BC. It's not just with the Aksum, with the steles in Kemet, but it's throughout the continent. We can look at Oranyan staff amongst the Yoruba, and we can look at the Michikenga people in Kenya and look at why did they resurrect these poles. And they still have the custom today Part of it has to do with ancestral commemoration, and resurrection. So the theme of resurrection, tomorrow is Resurrection Sunday for the Christians, and certainly the message is carried. Here you find many, many people depressed, not knowing what to do with their lives, but they must look back at the long line from which they've come, and that those thoughts and ideas that are positive are still available for them, so that the wisdom knot of the ancients that sat on the throne is the wisdom knots and ties that they too can pick up and learn about Mayat, for Mayat is truth. Learn about wisdom, for wisdom is better than knowledge, as great as knowledge is. You must choose that which is the spirit before knowledge, for if you choose the spirit, you'll have wisdom and knowledge, and that's the tree that you must eat of. Yes, we've had classical periods, as classical as they can come. The details are perfected. I mentioned the details of perfection in classism, that you have a fine polish on something. It's more than enough. It's like God creates things exceedingly abundantly above all. I mean, how many more adjectives do you want to get? Exceedingly is enough by itself. Exceedingly, abundantly, above all. And so to produce all of the varieties that you can imagine in whatever you would name. One apple, red apple, is good, but we got a green one, we got a yellow one, we got a Macintosh, we got a whole variety of them. I mean, 100 flowers are good enough, but you have far more than 100 and on different continents, and some species that have gone and we can't even recall them yet. And so then if there's sunflowers, there's bluebells, and there's pansies, and then there's daisies, and then there's honeysuckle, and then there's petunias, and then, gardenias, and jasmine, and on roses, and on goes the list, because that is the attitude that God had in the process of creating. And in creating and making, your imagery and your variety and your creativity must be strong, so strong that it'll banish all of the negative things. And so here's the mood of creativity in its classism, where you have the lips parched just so you can get just a little texture all on the lips to let you know the ear is well formed. The crown of the head is just such. And she has the attitude of a black person. You know how black people get when they sometimes serious, the lips are poked out? Study those faces when we get serious. I mean, when I was working at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, all of these originals, many of them were there, and you could walk through that hall. I'd walk through every day because I'd be lecturing about the things at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York. And it was so startling to the people, because when this show was, The Treasures of Ancient Nigeria was there, we weren't used to seeing that much classism in the museum all at once from the black world. And so it was remarkable, absolutely remarkable. But since then, we've had photography, and we used to looking at the photographs of blacks. But it looks like every time we take another step in technology or another step of advancement, then there are some other little demonic things that can go wrong, where people become so technologically advanced until they forget the spiritual angle. And so that our spiritualness must be as developed as the quest for technology. We must not only be left-brained. They say in psychology, left brain, cognitive ability, rationality, logic, analysis, language in the left brain. And then in the right brain, you almost must have that together too. Your emotions, your passions, your intuition. But we're more than left brain, right brain. Our ancestors told us we were more than left brain, right brain. We have to go back to Kemet for the answer. For the spirit has the ability to unite left brain, right brain. For the brain is nothing but a computer. And unless you have the Spirit working, that your brains may be in your fingertips. Your brains may be in your shoulders, your arm, all parts of you. And so the polyrhythmic aspects of who you are, the polyrhythmic aspects of the melanin nature is one that must be strong. Okay, here's Jean Lacey, an elder, and who paints, and she's showing you a comparison between the tenement buildings, project buildings in America, urban areas, and she's relating the activities inside to the dwellings of Kemetic people with the writing here and all. We have to kind of like move along. I want to just say a few things about Jean-Michel Basquiat, and before I wind up. Jean-Michel Basquiat, this is a picture of him when he was a young boy. He's one of the most powerful artists around, although he's no longer alive today. But his works command $600,000. That's the price range for one painting. And I have never seen any artist. I went to the Whitney Museum in New York, and I've never seen any artist given as much play as this one artist. The entire floor at the Whitney was devoted to him, floor-to-ceiling canvases. All of the galleries on that top floor, you know, the gallery floors where it's there, all was devoted to the works of Basquiat. And we must be very careful in analyzing the works of Basquiat, and of course it's out for our children to look at and to study and to drink of his life. And we're so much interested because he represents the here and now. He has the attitude of a visual rapper. He knows about history. He can tell you about ancient historic times, about the prehistoric times, about all of the rulers of Rome, of Greece, and the opera. And he can tell you about blacks in jazz, about the comic strip people and characters. All of that's in his work. He loves Archie, mural paintings, wall painting. He used to do graffiti-like art in New York at one time. So you see down in the Village area, there used to be a signature, S-A-M-O. And so people would follow back and knew that that signature was his. The signature meant S-A-M-O, same old shit. And so what it meant was what my husband said when I said about the New World Order. He says this S-A-M-O, you know, what it was. But he was a heroin addict. And so we must be careful when we hold up people and that we tell the fullness of their life. And so therefore, as art educators, you need to know this. Tell the children he did not succeed in life in the sense that he was a heroin addict, although he was extremely creative, and we can study him. So put him in the same category of a Van Gogh who cut off his ear, right? But he was extremely creative, and we know that. Picasso used opium. Modigliani had a hashish addiction. Henri Michel, mescaline was his downfall, or was a problem. And so we as human beings have had these flaws. And if we don't point it out to children at the right time, they will be putting in fantasy and emulating the wrong values and the wrong things. Okay. So Basquiat had a Puerto Rican mother, and his father was from a well-to-do family in Haiti. And so he claims that he was a close friend of Andy Warhol, and Warhol claimed that he got his intelligence and smarts from his father. Some of the writers, like Klaus Curtis, tried to say that he has voodoo in his art. But Robert Ferris Thompson at Yale says no, he doesn't think it's that at all, that he never visited Haiti, but that, and he never spoke Creole. But later we do see, I think, that he had some influences where he had learned the art of his people. And so you have the hereditary trend, and then you have a revivalist mode where you go back and pick up to become those things. But when he was a child, he used to live in Boerum Hill in Brooklyn. and he used to play ball in the street in 1968. And so while on 35th Street in Brooklyn, there was a passing automobile that hit him. Once again, we need playground places. And so I was given a little tour of Manchester looking at some of the housing projects. So right away I wanted to know, with so many housing projects, I said, where are the playgrounds? Is there plenty of places for the children to play, that they'll not just be boxed up and full of aggression and problems? And so he had to have surgery at that time, and they removed his spleen. But he was interested in art. He dropped out of school in 1977, and then he became the Soho East Village artist. So this painting shows the arms crossed on the chest. He picks up Egyptian iconography. The arrows are from Native American tradition. And the halo on top of the head, he plays with this halo, which is from ancient Egypt, becomes Christian. The thorns on the crown of Christ he uses, and at the same time that head becomes a big afro hairstyle. You can see the face is done in a very shocking manner, because it was meant to do to you what Khalid Muhammad does, to look at something that's more aggressive in its statement than sweet and nice. You can see that here's the word Jesus, J-E-S-U-S. He will include words to give you information in case you're not sure. Sometimes R or P and R means Parker, for Charlie Parker, because he knew, once again, all of the jasmine. Childlike drawings of cars and dogs and houses gives you the idea of tar. It says tar roof, T-A-R, you can read, and roof, tar roof. Tar is associated with black people, the tarring of things, but means melanin-rich people. Here we have images of a black Christ, Ethiopian, that was on a coin that we found, so that while many races will call Christ, Chinese will say he's Chinese, South Americans will say he's South American, the Ethiopians and Africans will say he was black. So here's a statement about the Cohen from the Cambridge Encyclopedia. It says, whatever the fact, this Cohen with the straight-haired, oh no, that's, wait. Justinian, oh, the reverse side, that's what it is. This is the reverse side, places beyond doubt the belief that Jesus was a Negro. But they don't mean Negro, but they say Negro, they mean black. Okay, so image of him and the new hairstyles of the short dreads on top and the shaved side areas of the hair. Reminds of the toughness of the societies around the world. This is in Kenya. Human beings relating parts of their face to the cosmos, to stars and planets. The tough boys on the street, painted and collaged by Romy Bearden. When he was alive, I asked Romy Bearden, I said, well, what is the meaning of this? He said, well, these are the tough boys in Pittsburgh. The children that become old men before their time. You can look in the faces and see that they've had stress and care, and they live out on the streets, the tough before their time children. Keep frozen, comic characters, etc. Hollywood Negroes, that's what this says. Hollywood Negroes, talking about, well, you know what that means. Inspiration from graffiti. Now, there's a dual effect of the picking up the new African hairstyles. But when we look back during the minstrel era, we will see that those same hairstyles were in existence and people made fun of them, the way that some people made fun of them today, but they're still in you know, part of the major part of hairstyles that we do when we try to be natural. Raymond Saunders' paintings show the same hairstyle within a classical mode. Okay, here's a self-portrait of where Basquiat's teeth was rotting and he was having all kinds of medical problems. And so he associated himself with death and with a skull and trauma and loss of blood and the whole business. Of course, in the Americas, we know the Aztec paintings that show life and death. But we're reminded of the T-shirt that Anthony Browder wears that show half and half, where one half is the Benin ivory pendant, Rockefeller collection, but Idea, Queen Idea of 14th to 18th century Nigeria. And the other half of the head is a black American. But here again is the association with death. Why association with death? The things that we're doing may be leading us down the drain, our imagery. Quetzalcoatl, the type forms, and also the leopard. The baby's mouth turns into the leopard fangs because it's the symbolism again of the opposites. A baby face, a big face like a baby, big eyes like a baby, but the power that's necessary to survive. It's like asking the Australian Aborigines, well, what do you want your child to be like? And they'll say, ah, with the tongue sticking out, meaning strong and powerful enough to survive. And so our children must not just be rockabye baby, sweet, sweet rockabye baby, mush, 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 and nothing else. But you must teach them to be strong with the information so that they'll be like little leopards or strong enough to survive. Ideal is in reference to the drug traffic. It means I, and it has one I deal in drugs is what it's saying. Money is the football, the main target. More ideal people dealing in drugs is the problem. And then, of course, faces and people in trauma. William Johnson painting during the Harlem Renaissance period, talking about the many rebellions that took place at the turn of the century. And so you said, well, suppose we get it all together. There was a community in Oklahoma that we thought got it all together. And you had black millionaires there in Tulsa, Oklahoma at the turn of the century, owned their own airplanes, owned their own theater. And what happened to them? They got bombed out. Ku Klux Klan, American government, jealous, upset, bombed them out. There was once upon a time during that Booker T. Washington era, blacks owned 29 million acres of land. Today we own 5. And so that we wonder what happened. Sometimes it seems as if the integration era, we became more educated and the more land we lost. So we're going to be talking in this conference, too, about some practical, very practical methods and ways to get together so that it's not just a discussion of things that tickle your fantasy, but that we will have some very practical applications of things to do, of people getting together, growing your own food, developing co-ops. I mean, why is it that you don't have any museums of black history and culture in Manchester? If not a museum, why don't you have at least a room this size where you have paintings on the wall? Why is it that you don't have a lot of more college graduates that's black in England? Why is it you don't have black studies departments in your college? And I think I'm going to begin to end here. This is, once again, some themes of life and death. 25 estimated value, 25, the value of things. What do things really mean and what are the real values? Are we selling ourselves down the drain? I think there was one I really wanted to kind of like stop on. Let's see. The concern for the poor. Ashes represents black people. Ashes. And toxic material for children. He's concerned with all of those problems. And the foods and the poisons that we eat. The drugs that are the wrong drugs. And then, of course, colonialism. Here's one on colonialism. He writes salt, and down below he writes, dare I say, gold. And so it's the same old problems. So his whole symbology, if you study a lot of his paintings, you'll study those things that are white and those things that are black. And salt, that's written here, salt, sugar, drugs, popcorns, things that puff up and not quite right, flour, things black like tar, ash, petroleum. He plays with some of those, black and white. But we know that white is positive. Once again, it represents spirit and soul and purity. And it can also be negative. But black is the same, can represent the unknown, and yet it can represent power. Red can be negative and positive. Red, yes, the blood, that's the blood of life. And yet red may represent danger, that which is negative. Green may be positive and negative. Green with envy is what we say. But we also say green with growth and development. And blue, we may say positive and negative. To have the blues is what we have always said. To have the blues is to be down and out. But to have blue is to have hope and peace, like the blueness of the sky that's without rain. And so in ending my talk here today, I say that we had a chance to look at both ancient and modern symbols and signs with the idea of working with imagery for children and dealing with imagery ourselves will have us an understanding, a better understanding how we can teach. And with the workshop that's coming up, I'll have more practical, detailed information about teaching in reference to youth. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much indeed. I don't know about you, but it's like when you go to those church conventions, you know, and you're with the speaker, you know, they're going on and they're giving you stuff and you're saying, yes, yes, and then they hit a part that has to do with you, and you're kind of quiet, you know? You gave me some food for thought there. Thank you very, very much. We've got a little bit of time now for questions. As the doctor has said, she will be running a workshop, so there'll be opportunities for people to ask more questions in that kind of forum. But I'd still like to offer the opportunity now for people to ask questions. Who'd like to start the ball rolling? Okay, right. You're all overgorge on food. No, there's a gentleman there. Could you make your way to the mic, please, sir? If there are people who have questions, could you please indicate clearly? We'll try and fit you in.
Otep, Sister Jeffers. I'm working in education at the moment. And relating to some of the images you put up, I walked into this school and what I saw was like a lot of pictures from Oxfam, charity showing black and brown children, yellow children. And I was thinking what impact that would have on the pupils, the black pupils of the school, because they didn't have images that were positive of men or women. And I'd like to say to everyone here that we need obviously positive images on the walls as opposed to just those negative images. My question is, what influence would those pictures have on the children, basically?
You mean what impact would paintings have that are interracial groupings of paintings?
Well, just picture the scene, basically. You have white teachers trying, they have this good intention of helping black people. and they're putting up pictures from Oxfam, which are showing people who are malnutritious. Yes, you know the word.
Malnutrition, yeah.
On the wall,
Yeah.
okay? And I'm saying that they're not countering these negative pictures with positive ones.
Oh, yes, that's
Do you
being done.
understand where I'm coming
Yes, I
from
know what
now?
you mean, yes.
Right.
It's like in New York, the exhibitions that they started to put up during the time when they were having the Somalian famine. And all of them were famine pictures. People would go in and they would gawk over the poverty and the poor, etc., without having any understanding that Ethiopia was the first Christian nation in the world, and that Aksum existed with steles as wonderful as those you find in Kemet, and a long, tremendous history that was just wonderful. Or people looking at the starving children in Somalia. But Somalia had a writing too. That's what we'll look at in the workshop too. There was a writing system as much as the writing system existed amongst the people in Ethiopia. And so that once again, liking to see us poor and starved out, although that was some truth. So sometimes we're at a little dilemma there because we want to know what's going on around the world, what's happening. And where poverty is and the people are dying, we want to know about those things no matter who the people are, what race they are. Particularly when they affect us, we're always interested, but we're interested in them all. And so, too, a nice teacher doing well, yes, but not knowing to counterbalance it because the teacher may not know. So what it means is that we also need these same kind of sessions for teachers so that the teachers mean well, that they would have a better understanding. And also the curriculum material that's available. One good thing a teacher like that could do is visit our table outside where you have all of the books for children. A whole section of those books might do well to balance out in the classroom the visuals that's necessary. I do have a book says Life Doesn't Frighten Me, poems by Maya Angelou. And the drawings in this is by Jean Basquiat, the drawings in this book. And the drawings, by and large, are little horrible things like the cover shows you this little demon here with the crown on top, meaning that no matter how horrible I may seem or the problems that are aggravating and aggressive or the stress in my life as a child, the crown is there. I wear the crown. It's the crown that Archie, the comic character, wears, but he puts it over the head of many people, particularly the sportsmen that do well. He'll show the crown on top of the head, saying that things are bad and horrible sometimes, but I'm still winning, and I'm still born right and royal. And throughout, there are many pictures, and she continues to, here again, you find boxers but fighting, but the crown is there. The battle between black and white, but crown is on both. The crown is over the white and over the black person, you see, saying that we were born to be a certain way. So these are the poems of Maya Angelou, and they're done for children, and says, life does not frighten me, trying to teach the realities, the harsh realities of life to them. And to counterbalance some of the negative things, we also have, I also have this baby Whitney doll. It's a calendar here that has very positive images. This is this year's calendar of baby Whitney looking like a Brazilian. And inside the calendar, I'll show more of that later, you have images where she looks African American, or looks like she's part of the international crowd, you know, could be a Britisher, someone from the Caribbean, the whole business. And so that's a way of putting things up that are very positive to counterbalance what might be the negative image of the starving child in Ethiopia or wherever.
Thank you very much. Brother at the front.
Yes, slide presentation. And as you rightly said, decharging the negative energy. One of the things I'd like to comment on, in our traveling around, we too have to show positive Africa. And in universities, We even find out that there are people graduating with master's degree that haven't even seen flowing streams in Africa. So what we are thinking, that the universities should look closer to expressing themselves with some of the images that are positive. And as you say, put it in their classrooms, if they can't find a hall or something like this. But one of the things I find that was negative is they don't have accessibility to getting the positive things for African people or Africa. We see the starving children, we see the drought, we see the famine, we see all of these things that are negative.
I want you to use the mic.
Again, to go over, I was speaking on the portion that you had decharging the negative energy or transforming the image. That it seems that in the universities and the schools throughout the Western world, the positive Africa is never given. We are blinded by the media of only the negative Africa. And in the school systems, when we just came off of a tour, we found out that people who were graduating even with a master's degree, except for watching Tarzan movies, they had not even seen flowing streams in Africa. And my question is, do you think it would work better if those who have the information and those who have the pictures, for instance, can start to exploit it in the classrooms where people will have a chance to look at these things, lest we continue only to see the negative and not have a chance to be inspired by those things that are positive? I was enjoying the slide projection, but I'm sure many of us have never looked at it in that positive manner. We're still seeing Humpty Dumpty and thinking that the king's horses can't help, but there is something that can help us. So that's basically a comment and a question.
All right. What my response is that it's not a real lack of information, and it's not any lack of the knowledge. What it is politics. That's what it is. We know of cases where wonderful curriculum material was developed, Afrocentric oriented, and thousands of the books stayed in the basement, and I think to this day they're in the basement in New York City, never got out. Why? Because if those books went out, they would replace somebody else's books that were in circulation by the thousands and thousands, and that person would lose out on the money. And so, therefore, who's allowed to put books in particular school systems is part of the political hierarchy of who's going to get the money, when, and where. And so that's why the great attack came on my husband and people like that, and Asa Hilliard, because they were talking about developing multicultural curriculums, and people wanted the status quo to stay. So as in the painting, when we were talking about the estimated value of human lives, this is that meaning. How much do we esteem the life? What price do we put on the lives of our children? That they have to be caught up in this political battle that way, right? So it's a question of who gets the contract for cleaning schools? More important sometimes than the children. Who gets the right to tear down these groups of buildings or put up or the asbestos here? I was looking at the in Ghana last summer where I think they sent asbestos roofs material down to Ghana for a village, all in this village. Why? Because it was material that we had declared dangerous, and so we didn't want it in America. So we sent it to Ghana. Somebody obviously got the money. and it was some kind of money deal. So this is what we meant about integrity and talking today about values, and that it's something that crosses racial lines. It's a problem of integrity for our day, age, and time. And it's kind of like a big call that's out now, that you either straighten up, no matter what race or color or creed, you either straighten up or you're going to die out.
Right, there's a brother at the back. Could you come forward, please? I'd like to offer the floor to one more question after this brother, and then we'll close.
Greetings to my brothers and sisters here. Greetings, Dr. Jefferies, from all the way back in New York and Howard University. That's right, y'all. You have brothers and sisters that come and check you because your vibe is correct all around the world. You are a citizen of the world. This is your globe. No one tells you where to walk because you walked here first. My name is Don Kwabena Ajeti. I'm a member of the group Sunchild who will be performing here later on. I just wanted to give thanks once again because many of my ancestors and elders don't understand that young people are changing. There is something happening only because of the blood and sweat and tears that my ancestors and my elders have had to face. And even though some of us are still not truly understanding where the hip and the hop and the bebop and how it flows and where it goes and where it came from, some of us are moving to that understanding. So I give thanks for meetings and gatherings of this nature. The brothers and sisters will tell you that we joined this last year and played with children for 3.5 hours out in Bristol in a parking lot instead of attending some of the sessions that we were supposed to attend, because the children, these young brothers and sisters I see in here, are my future as well. And I refuse to allow them to be continually enslaved mentally. The media is doing a real good job, y'all. A real good job. But that's the brief statement. I'll see you later on this evening. The family once again gives respect. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I would like to say, too, behind that is that, yes, we are fighting a battle on the education front, trying in these programs that call multicultural. Sometimes we have to be very careful because sometimes they'll say multicultural and it's so multi until there's, by the time you get to black folks, it's so watered down until it's nothing. And so that while we're still fighting those battles, you have to take things into your own hands. And the way to do that is you have to teach them yourself. And how are you going to teach them yourself? You must organize study groups. Even if it's 4 people, you 4 people decide which books you're going to study. Professor Smalls didn't come, but he's an expert in setting up study groups. But even if it's only 4 people and you decide which books you're going to start off with, go through Check Unto Diop. You want to go through Miseducation of the Negro, Carter G. Woodson, and a whole list of books. I think the conference has a list. And you can start with those, and you can end up using your study groups to organize for this conference, so that this would be the feeding area, so that every year you know that these study groups will all culminate and come to this as a national conference. But you can't sit down and wait for people to do right when they've done wrong for so long. And it's not a question of finding out the information. The information is there.
True talk. Okay, the last question from the sister in the middle there.
Can you reach?
Right. I want to thank the speaker very much for especially the early start of the talk, because although some of the information is new, I think I speak not just for myself, but some of us here who felt that deep down what you were introducing was deep-bedded genetic information that we knew. Yeah? Right. I'm a teacher and have been so for 20 years. In my first decade in middle school, which is like 9 to 13-year-old, I can remember purchasing books, the first set of black books in schools, and the head teacher doing exactly as you said, putting them away. After I was the only Afro-Caribbean teacher then. And realizing that although you want to change the images in schools, the school system doesn't let you. Not only don't the white teachers let you, but I've seen today that some black teachers are not actually proud of their own images. Yes? I also came from a history of working quite strongly with Saturday schools and politically organizing. I think the media within school, or media images within school, is more politically bound than just images, because many of us here have found that it is easier to take control of it ourselves. Much of the information that you deliver today is information in part, but we as a population in England are not yet in charge of it. We have had our not museums, but our exhibitions, etc., dotted up all over the country. But the consistency with which we are eroded is perhaps a little bit different to America, all right? Part of what I'm saying is giving you a response to some of what you were saying earlier. But I'd like you to understand the British context. We have been trying very hard, because even in the 80s, in a secondary school, I was doing the same thing, and even inviting some of the poets up so that children would see the people from whose books that these black writers were actually, that they were studying from, yeah? But again, we're in the 90s, and I'm listening to things that are coming out. Have you ever seen a book of rice and peas, which is mashed potatoes and green peas dotted at the side? Because today, the white woman and man is now taking over the multicultural commercialization of the media. And how we then get into that, perhaps it could be a question, but that is the dilemma we face today. And I want to know how America actually take over the control of media to place into schools, Saturday schools, homes, church groups, community groups, whatever, because we might have a lesson to learn from that, in taking back control over education and the media and images.
The problem is not solved. I think some of the other speakers will probably like to address some of those areas, but I would say that the problem is not solved. I showed my class this week. I have a class in racism and ethnicity, and I showed them some of a new series that has come out, brand new series. There's 15 different ethnic groups. That's what it's being advertised as, multicultural, 15 different ethnic groups in America. And so they go on to show, I think it's 3 in that series from Asia, Koreans, Japanese, and Chinese. And then there's a number of them from European Americans, Italians, Greeks, Spanish, there's some others too. But when it comes to Africa, then they said African American. And see, there's something wrong with that, right? There's something wrong. They're treating African Americans, an entire continent, with one tape and call it ethnic, you see? And that was wrong. Whereas they're talking about Europe, and there's Italian Americans, there's, there's German Americans, right? There's Spanish Americans, the whole group, Irish Americans, a whole group of all of these. And then there's 3 for Asia, Chinese Americans, Koreans Americans, and Japanese. But one tape called African American dealing with the whole continent. If they were fair, they would have said Jamaican Americans, Haitian Americans, then go on to say, for Africa, they could have said Nigerian Americans, or they could have said, Ethiopian Americans, etc. But if they wanted to put all of Africa into one kind of an area, it certainly should not have been the same one that you put the Caribbean groups in as well. So that by and large, people come to a stumbling block and they don't know where to classify or how to classify or what to do with black peoples, and so they would rather do nothing. And so they do nothing and leave us out altogether. Then they say, well, we can't leave them out. Let's put a little token. And so by and large, that's what you get, a little token amongst something that's a serious work. And so people are still trying to solve and to deal with those things. And we remember that we have to fight that battle, because there's no progress, there's no struggle, right? As Frederick Douglass says, men want crops without plowing up the ground, right? And so they want certain things without the awful roar of the many waters. But part of the struggle, if you don't struggle, you will get no gain, right? So that's very important to know, and you can't stop there with the battle. As I mentioned, you got to start in the classrooms and with your own people and your own grouping, because if you work on that front line strongly, the children will walk in black history into their own classrooms, and you'll not have to fight that battle. There's such beautiful, wonderful textbooks for children out there. You get them full of that and full of their own things that they get at home. And with your own small groupings, those teachers will go out looking for to keep up with the children.
Right, I'd like to bring the question session to a close. Thank you very, very much, Dr. Jefferies, for what has been an excellent talk. If anything, I will take from it your point about wisdom being more important than knowledge. I have a few announcements to make, but before I do so, can I just ask you please to warm up and give the woman a hand for what has been an excellent talk? Thank you very, very much. Okay. We need to be spontaneous sometimes, We're living in the cold, but we ain't cold, right? We're not cold people. Okay, let me just give a few announcements. We're going to have a short break now, and then the workshops will start at 4 o'clock, okay? So it's going to be a really short break. Workshop A, which is on Afrocentricity, appraisals, and applications, will be in the Limes. Workshop B, Africans in the Media, will be in Tree Court, and there are instructions outside in the foyer, I think, when you go outside, so look on the notice board. And Workshop 3, Healthy Images for Healthy Minds, will be here in the hall. Is that right? Yeah? Okay. I need to remind delegates who are here just for one day, could you please hand in your plastic badges, because we can recycle them and use them again. We ain't got no money, so please pass them on. And also to just remind you to check again in the foyer for details. If there are any changes and so on to the program, we'll be putting them up in the foyer, so check in the foyer. Workshops start at 4 o'clock. Please be back here promptly at 5:30. Thank you very much.